Okay, so now that I've just illustrated the difference between the price of an item and the cost of an item, I can go into the fixed price type of a contract. So the fixed price contract, here we have our axis of money on this side and then time on the bottom. So notice I've already written in the fixed price, and let's say that it's violins. I'm in the business of making violins, and over time this is the price of each violin as I make it. So theoretically, my blue line is now going to represent cost. My cost should be somewhere down here, because then this will be profit to me. However, in reality, the vendor's cost might actually shoot up. Say that the price of fuel goes up, or the price of wood suddenly shoots way up, and then it might shoot way down. So notice that the vendor is going to be paid the exact price, no matter what their actual costs are. So in a fixed price contract, the vendor is going to take most of the risk of financial gain or loss onto himself or herself. So here we have the price, and notice over here, if the costs are way down, what happens? Great deal more profit. But notice if the costs are up, the vendor is actually working at a loss during this time period. So rather than raise prices during, for instance, the fuel shortage that we, or not shortage, but extremely high fuel prices that we experienced over the past year or two, did in fact drive some vendors' prices up to where they were working at a loss because the cost of fuel and shipping added so much cost to their overall operation that they were working at a loss. But if they expected the price to go back down, which it fortunately did, they chose not to raise their rates until banking that the price would go back down. So you can see how, again, there's the price, setting the price, if you're a vendor or a contractor, is really very critical, because you have to set the price to a point where you're going to be making money. You never want to get into this loss situation, because I think people go into business to make money, not to lose money, and you certainly wouldn't be in business very long if you were operating in this sort of a situation. So obviously, and hopefully you can see here, that the vendor's motivation in a fixed price contract is to do what? They want that profit margin to be as large as possible. So they're going to want to drive costs down, their actual costs down, so that way the difference between the cost, what it costs them to make something, and the price that they're charging for it is substantial, because then that essentially results in a much larger profit. So now that hopefully you've watched the one on the cost reimbursement, cost plus fixed fee, and here at the other end of the scale is the fixed price, hopefully you can see the difference here between the sorts of motivations of a vendor. In both situations, the vendor would want to keep costs down, but in this one, they're going to take more of the profit. So there's more of a motivation to keep their costs extremely low. Whereas in cost reimbursement, because they're going to be reimbursed for their actual costs of raw materials and things of that sort, it's not necessarily bad for them to get higher quality materials. In fact, that's generally one of the reasons that we would want a cost reimbursement contract. But in a fixed price contract, there is in fact this motivation to keep costs down quite low. And that's something that we notice, because in our commercial lives, our contracts are almost all entirely fixed price. You go to the store, you buy something, and you notice that over time, sometimes the quality of something goes way down because the vendor, yet the price stays the same, and that's because the vendor is trying to increase their profit by driving down their overall costs. So there, in a nutshell, you have the fixed price sort of contract arrangement, and again, in complete contrast to the cost plus fixed fee contract arrangement. There's a couple of other types in between these two extremes, and I'll have to do a snippet on those types. So until next time, fixed price